What if the next billion-dollar idea did not make profits, but changed a million lives instead? That's the question at the heart of today's conversation. Varun Aggarwal is a deep tech thinker, entrepreneur, AI researcher, author, and social sector evangelist. Shubham Bansal is an IIT Delhi and EPFL Switzerland alumnus who co-founded a Y-Combinator-backed startup before switching tracks to social impact. Together, they run Change Engine, a new-age non-profit accelerator that wants to build 20 non-profit unicorns in India. A Y-Combinator, if you were, for the social sector. And a non-profit unicorn, like I said, is one that reaches over 1 million people. So, in a nutshell, Varun and Shubham are creating a structured path for non-profits to scale like startups. Their latest publication, the Playbook for Non-Profit Unicorns, offers field-tested lessons from 33 organizations, and it makes a case that the Indian development sector is ready for its own tech-like inflection point. So, can nonprofits really scale like startups? How do nonprofits break into government systems? What's broken in India's philanthropic funding model, and what are the ways in which it can be fixed? Where are the biggest tech-led opportunities in the social sector? And what intrinsic changes, including regulatory reforms, can unlock the next 100 nonprofit unicorns? Listen on, it's Thursday, the 24th of July. I'm Anirban Chowdhury, and this is the Morning Brief. Shubham, Varun, very warm welcome to the Morning Brief. So glad you could make time for us.
Thanks, Anirban. It's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Very excited to talk to you.
Let's start with, how you guys met, how this idea came about, and of course, how you found an intersection in both your ideas to make it one common goal. Shubham, why don't you start?
Sure. So I met Varun when I was in college, in my final year, trying to do a startup that was working in rural areas, trying to bring solar energy to schools. And I got introduced to Varun through a professor of mine. Varun was trying to do something in social impact space at IIT, and my professor suggested, this is a kid, talk to him. He might be able to do something with you there. Obviously, the startup didn't go anywhere. We had really no clue how to scale it up. My co-founders left and all of that happened. But I stayed in touch with Varun. He's been a mentor. And years later, when I was exiting my second startup and thinking about how can you enable other founders who want to go into nonprofit space, work on meaningful problems and support them, that's when we got together again to build Change Engine.
Varun, what is your story?
So, Anirban, I am basically an engineer by training. Went to MIT for my graduate studies. Always wanted to do something in India. That's what brought me back. And for the longest time, I was running this startup called Aspiring Minds, which was trying to create a GRE for jobs, a common platform test which students can take as a way to measure their employability and get connected to companies. So we built that company, we expanded it to US, China, Philippines, and we were fortunate to be also able to do some policy work. So we did the national employability reports, which looked at what percentage of engineers and graduates are employable. I sold this company in 2019. And since then, I've been spending most of my time in philanthropy and trying to do good. Change Engine is a major engine for that. So we want to use Change Engine to create 20 nonprofit unicorns in the country over the next decade.
What made you realize that building nonprofit unicorns, the time for that is now?
Yeah, I think three things started coming together, right? One is that I saw a lot of my peer group venturing into nonprofit space, trying to work on more meaningful problems. A lot of my classmates and colleagues from IIT actually started up nonprofits. And second, if you look at over the last 10 to 15 years, we have now 100 plus unicorns in the country. A lot of wealth creators are now startup and tech folks. And so they have started putting money back into socially relevant causes. and supporting, long-term bets, ambitious bets. So those two factors, like a confluence of talent being available and capital becoming like being unlocked, has helped the ecosystem to come together, right?
I can add to that, Anirban. So we have had wide digitization in the country. So mobile networks have penetrated. We have the payment systems and so on. So what would happen earlier is that nonprofits would have a high transaction cost to reach the last mile, which has significantly reduced, right? So you have better capital efficiency in making impact, right? The other point which we'll discuss later also is that we are seeing that the government is very keen to work with nonprofits, and we see that all across the board on agendas which they care for, especially in public service delivery. Government wants to partner with nonprofits, so that has given pathways to scale. We think this is the movement for the nonprofit ecosystem to take off, right? With all these factors which have come together, where you have talent, you have capital, you have playbook to having impact, and the government is aligned.
Right. No, but tell me, when Shubham, especially when you met your colleagues and friends who were setting up nonprofits, were there pain points, were there a list of pain points that jumped at you that you wanted to solve? Because a great idea is always about solving problems, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I was also able to contrast with what I had seen, the support available to startup founders.
correct.
Right? So one of the challenges that I saw was that these founders were running great pilot programs where they were impacting 100 to 200 people, but then they didn't know how to take it forward from there, how to scale this up. The other thing that is still lacking is a supportive community. If you take it, compare it to the startup world, you have angel investors, you have VCs, you have accelerators, right? And I see that non-profit founders are struggling with those things here on. But we have the moment to now sort of change that and catalyze the ecosystem for these people.
Understood. So, talking about, your basic outline for that playbook, evidence, public goods, and interventions for change as a scaling framework, when you sort of sifted ideas in the beginning, what was the example of a bad idea and a good idea? Like a bad idea being brilliant for maybe benefiting a limited number of people, like you said, brilliant as a pilot project, but not ultimately scalable. And an idea which is sort of seems ordinary but has immense potential in terms of scaling and obviously funds. Varun.
So I think, I would not call it bad ideas, and I'd probably give some color on that a little later. But I think there are ideas which are intrinsically non-scalable, right? Like we've seen people who would be doing these really deep skilling programs in rural areas, right? And it would be a 6-month kind of intervention in person, high cost per training for person, and so on. And it's not clear how you will scale this to millions of people.
Okay. Because the space is too cluttered, is that what?
No, it is just, it is not cluttered, but the problem is that it's a very deep intervention, right? So easy interventions are like where you would, in behavioral economics, that you would probably change an opt-in to an opt-out, saying that, okay, like, there's a simple intervention saying that if there are insurance forms, right, you tell people to opt in, very few opt in for insurance, right? Whereas if you say, oh, you opt out, then most of the people have insurance in it, right? So those are more small, changes you can do, which kind of creates impact, right? Versus they're very deep interventions like education, right? Where, now nonprofits and the government has been working for 10 to 20 years, but still hard to create impact. The ones which are more scalable, and this is one of the organizations which we work very closely with, is, for example, cash transfers. Cash transfers can be done with very low friction to poor people. So, for example, the skilling thing would come to us where someone will say, hey, we're running this skilling program. Or even recently, we had one organization and said that we are running this entrepreneurship program in rural areas and semi-urban areas in a district, right? And we are training a few people on entrepreneurship. And then we are seeing some success with these people, right? So the question we'll ask them back is that, okay, you have now done it for 20 people. How would you do it for 1,000 people, right? And is there a way to replicate this at 4,000 people at low increase or marginal cost, right? And human effort, right? So these are the kind of questions we'll ask, and probably the person will not be able to suggest an answer, or some creative entrepreneur would have an answer. One answer could be that, look, the government already has entrepreneurship programs for mass employment. So I will somehow go and intervene with that program, make that program better, rather than me going person to person trying to teach them entrepreneurship. plug into some government program which is already kind of running. Another way to turn this bad idea into a good idea is saying that, okay, can I do it like through self-help groups, right? Self-help groups have been very, very successful in India for people to save money, for women to save money and use that money for buying assets and so on and so forth. So I think that's the core, Anirban, that, how do you take some intervention which looks very, very high friction and where you would have to spend a lot of time taking it from one person to 1,000 people to finding a lever where you can scale it, either by using the government system or communities or technology, right? So I think that's how I would look at it.
Got it. Let's take the government side of it first. I think a lot of non-profits, I think the number is about 80% of them, latch on to some or the other government project or the government, I think within a year and a half of their founding. What is a good way to break into that sort of circle, system, whatever you call it? Shubham?
Yeah, I think there are 2 or 3 things needed if you want to successfully crack that, right? One is, have you been able to use data and evidence to build a solid case, either on the problem and on your proposed solution? And then, as you would do for any sales job, right, map out who are the stakeholders in the government, right? Whether you want to go after legislatures, bureaucrats, which department, and map those stakeholders out, and then figure out a connection to those people. Either you reach out, do a cold outreach to them, send them a mail, send them a letter to their office, or use your advisory board to find a connection to these people. And I quote us, interesting anecdote which we found while we were researching this playbook. So there's this organization called PRS Legislative Research. It was interesting that how they got their first breakthrough. So these guys were young to policy space. They didn't have any connections. And what they did was they would go to the parliament's website, see what are the bills that were going to be discussed in the next month, and do the research on those bills, put together a 2-page document and send it out to all the parliamentarians, right? They would actually physically send these letters to them. And once they created that cadence, a lot of parliamentarians came back to them and say, hey, we are going to discuss this. Can you do a session with our party or with our colleagues? And that's how they sort of got more integrated into the system. So that's a great way, startups operate like that. And we encourage non-profit founders to also, hustle in that way,
Right.
and get a break.
Right. Sorry. So just a counter question. Does your involvement stop at advising them, or do you also facilitate meetings, outreach?
You mean through the Change Engine program?
Correct.
Yeah, so the way I position this to founders is that we become your co-founders for the next 6 to 9 months of the program, which means that we are not giving you just abstract gyan. Like, we are actually going down into the weeds with you, working closely with you, trying to find a meeting, help prepare that document, build a case for it with you, accompany you for the meeting as well.
Got it. No, so tell me, I'm very curious, what are the, say, 2 ways in which you as an incubator would be similar to a startup incubator, and what are the 2 ways in which you're completely different? Varun?
So I think we would be similar in the way that we are looking at scale. What is your scaling lever? First, even before you talk about the scaling lever, what is success for you? Right? For example, if you're trying to do rural entrepreneurship, is success for you impacting 10,000 women or 1 million women? Right? So the way we define non-profit unicorns is organizations which impact 1 million people.
So initial questions are similar. That's what you're
Correct. The
saying.
initial questions are very, very similar. I think how it is different is that the levers are very different for scale as compared to a startup. So startup has pretty much one lever, which is saying that use the market forces to scale, right? Non-profits operate where there's a market failure, right? So the market is already resisting the idea and you want to push it. So those levers are very, very different.
That's a brilliant point. Yeah. But do you have to often train these entrepreneurs, if I may call it them, even in sort of basics as to why money is important and why, is there a mindset change, which you don't have to do with startups because they're all entrepreneurs, so they will think on those lines.
Sure.
But in the social sector, it's different.
Yeah, 2 comments on that, right? First, what I find non-profit entrepreneurs good at, as opposed to startup entrepreneurs, is that they have a very deep understanding of their problem. Like, we had one non-profit which was working on agency in women in rural areas. And she had this very interesting insight where she said that if the woman is earning that is bad for the family.
How did they solve it, by the way, this whole mindset change?
So there's, interestingly, Anirban, there's global research on how do you create agency in women, right? And this is a sub part of that. But the idea is that once there will be a critical mass of women in a village who are earning, then the taboo will go away. The other way is that what is not a taboo is working for the government. The government job is really, really big, right? That's a way that is celebrated in villages, right? Another way, so these are all hacks, right? Another way to solve the taboo is that if the district collector will come and award this woman who's got a job, it will suddenly become a matter of pride than otherwise. So you have to do things like this. So for this non-profit, a lot of our work was saying that what is that critical mass in a village if you get, then it will become a virtuous cycle, right? And there will be a demand for things like this and so on.
How often do you guys actually go to, say, villages and, work closely with these entrepreneurs? Shubham?
Yeah, so I think we try to make sure that for each of the organizations that we work with, we actually go to their area of work. Usually, this means like at least a couple of visits with each of the team. And sometimes, if it's needed more, we can do that as well. But that's at least in the beginning when we are also trying to get the context of the problem. That has been one thing that we find very helpful.
Must be very rewarding, the wealth of knowledge that you get about how India really works. I mean, this wouldn't be available to, say, a venture capital firm, perhaps.
You learn a lot on the ground, right? And there's this maxim which we give to all of our entrepreneurs, and we have to eat our own dog food, right? Is that you have to listen to people and listen to what their problems are, right? So there's this person you might know, Dr. Abhay Bang, who did this experiment in Gadchiroli on infant mortality, right? And he said that, we don't listen enough to the community, right? And how it manifested for him is that when he went to Gadchiroli, he did some study and he said that, there are these vitamin deficiencies in people. And then he went and told people that, why don't you take this vitamin supplement? You have this deficiency. And the people said that, who told you that we care for this deficiency, right? That is not our problem. So, okay, so what is your problem? And he said, the people said, our problem is, हमारे बच्चे मर जाते हैं. Our kids die. So can you solve that problem, right? So we are many times in our ivory tower, thinking about what problems should be solved. But we need to put our ear to the ground, right? And so we also try to do it. But for us, we depend a lot on the entrepreneur to bring that on the table as well.
Okay, let's come to funding. Sorry, I have a very, very basic question for you. For example, if my friend wants to start a nonprofit, or he has started one but he's not scaled up and he's thinking funds, right, 2 years down the line, what are the sources that 2 or 4 or 5 sources that you can think of?
Sure. So one, of course, you can look at CSR, the corporate social responsibility from the industry. Then a lot of HNIs also write checks. So going to HNIs and philanthropists is a good idea. Then there are foundations, like the Azim Premji Foundation is there, and so on and so forth, right? Which again give checks to individuals. Some of these give multi-year grants. The other very interesting mechanism which has worked for a lot of nonprofits is crowdfunding. So I think these would be the different sources a person can go to.
So your report notes that it takes $150,000 per year for 3 years to de-risk a nonprofit. Now, it's fairly known that the funding channels, pipelines in the philanthropic sort of scheme of things is fairly broken. So what can change? I mean, for, say, institutional donors, CSR lenders, what should be done differently, and how are you guys playing a role?
Just to add some context to this, Anirban, traditionally nonprofits are seen as service delivery organizations in the country, right? Which basically means that a lot of funding in the country is very programmatic, which is meant to scale the service. This focus on programmatic money is helpful if you're trying to increase efficiency of a philanthropic dollar. If I've given 1,000 rupees to a non-profit, how much percentage of it goes actually to the end user, right? Typically, we have set industry benchmarks as that the overhead should not be more than 10%, right? So this focus on programmatic funding restricts the ability of a non-profit to invest in innovation, right? Which means that they're not able to, find the best talent to work on that problem, or, spend on building a technology or trying out a new model. They're forced to just scale up whatever the program they're running, right? So while this improves efficiency, it curbs innovation. So what we have been trying to evangelize is, can you give more unrestricted capital to nonprofits, which they can either, spend on innovation or they can do programs, but leave that judgment to the entrepreneur.
Okay. And how are they reacting? The corporates or whoever the donors, etc., whoever you
I think what we have seen is that when you talk to individuals who've taken that journey, a lot of them see the value in it, right? So if you talk to startup folks, they obviously know that, you need to get the best engineer in the world to build the product. And for that, you need to pay up, right? So some of that acceptance we have seen if you try to position nonprofits as engines of social innovation, but still we have a long way to go there.
I can, add some color and maybe with an example, right? So let's assume that there's a non-profit which is providing meals to children, right? What we want is that more money is available, let's say, for this person to be able to do some research on figuring out how government can fund meals better, right? Through cash transfers or other welfare schemes, right? But for that, he will need a person who can do public policy research. Then he'll need a person who can knock the doors of the government and get that implemented, right? So the money which is needed for all these functions, that has been largely missing in the ecosystem. More money has been that which will, with some overheads, go to the beneficiary. So what we have been trying to advocate for and push for is that give money for innovation. And here innovation could be a policy report, it could be evidence, it could be a community program design, so on and so on, or it can be a technology.
Understood. Understood. Another really, really basic question. There are these stories about corruption in the social sector. Do you face that in the ideas that come to you or the individuals that you talk to?
So I think, Anirban, I don't think there is no corruption in the sector. There is corruption in this sector as there is corruption in any other sector, right? But I think there's a critical mass of good, well-meaning entrepreneurs already in this sector who want to do good. I don't think we have rejected anyone because we felt that this is a scam. I think there's more corruption when it is a family which is making money and which is then using the non-profit as a laundering instrument. But these people are not like they have a lot of money which they can launder through a non-profit, right? So they're in fact taking salary cuts themselves to run these non-profits.
Do you get a lot of really brilliant tech-backed ideas that solve problems better?
So we do. Like one of the organizations we worked last year with is called Scholarlyfy, and they are building a digital stack to democratize scholarships, right? So a lot of organizations want to give out scholarships to, let's say, women in school or to people to get into to fund their higher education, so on and so forth. Some want to fund people who are in tribal areas and so on. But there's no distribution mechanism for it. And this guy created an online portal where you can publish a scholarship, and they collaborate with grassroots nonprofits where these scholarships get distributed. They help people fill in the applications, and then there's a whole stack to evaluate it with Aadhaar validation, mark sheet validation, and so on and so forth. So this is a good example of a technology innovation, but we would like to see more.
An example of this from the report would be rocket learning, right? So these guys work on the early childhood education in rural areas. And the key insight there was that, if you're a young child in an urban family, right, you get exposed to so much of educational material in your environment in itself. But that doesn't happen in underserved communities. So they've built WhatsApp-based chatbots that send in relevant videos for children to look at, that exposes them to audio visual, that can help these children in their very early formative years get exposed to learning, language, and all of that, right?
Got it. So from our discussion yet, what I've gathered is that the best ideas have come to you from education, women in the workforce. Do I have it right, or are there more sectors that throw up really interesting ideas at you?
No, these two are definitely correct, but the third one would be, we have this organization we worked with last year called Project Deep, which is helping state governments make their cash transfer schemes more efficient.
Yeah. Cash transfers was the other one. Yeah.
So that is another one where we get good ideas. And because you have asked me this question, one thing which I think people don't understand well is that they think that nonprofits only do social justice kind of stuff. But nonprofits also do economic efficiency stuff, right? A lot of things around ease of doing business, have come from works of non-profits, not only in India, but across the world, right? And a lot of think tanks have worked on how to improve economic growth in the country, right? We have been discussing of incubating an organization called the Center for Startup Policy on how can you have India's startup policy be among the best in the world, right? And that is going to create a stronger economic growth for the country. But a non-profit has to do such work as well, right? So we would like to see more ideas where people are also thinking non-profits as a way to improve India's economic growth, right? Because it's finally the virtuous cycle gets established when there's economic growth and there's social redistribution of that money, right? So we need ideas on both spaces.
Got it. Final question on challenges. What are the roadblocks, and you can please include regulatory bottlenecks as well, in the way of creating, say, the next 100 non-profit unicorns?
Sure. So I think, Karan, I'll give a positive spin to this question on what can be done, right? Again, the startup ecosystem, right? 10 years back, the Startup India program started, right? And government became a market maker in the startup ecosystem by doing this fund of funds. We started catalyzing capital for the ecosystem. I think the movement has come that the same thing has to be done for non-profits. So the government should step in as a market maker, and the unrestricted funding or innovation funding, which we have been talking about, they should start unlocking it. Once they start unlocking it, others would also unlock it in the ecosystem. It will also give us better mechanisms of evaluating non-profits because some standards will be set by the government when they start doing these fundings. There are regulatory challenges, like opening a bank account for a non-profit is harder than opening a bank account for a for-profit company, right? We want to do some work on what is ease of doing a non-profit as you have ease of doing business, and find out what these challenges are and then be able to take it to the government that these can be simplified, because I think there's a major unlock which can happen at this moment of time given what is happening in it. The other thing is that CSR money it's not clear whether there's a mandate from the government or it has become a best practice to give it for programs rather than for innovation. If the government can come out and clearly say that, there's X% of this money, let's say 20%, that you can give out for innovation, that will really, really help the ecosystem, right? Like during COVID, they modified CSR and said that money can be given for research and science, right? So I think there could be more modification in the CSR Act looking at the times. So those two would be on my wish list.
Absolutely. Varun, Shubham, thank you very much for joining us on the Morning Brief. It was a wonderful discussion.
No, thank you, Anirban. Thank you for choosing this topic. I think it's much needed to reach everyone, and we had a wonderful discussion. Thanks for all the questions.
So, here are my takeaways. Scaling social impact needs more than intent. It actually needs a playbook. India's next big innovation may not come from a boardroom, but from a grassroots classroom. Unrestricted capital and patient partnerships are the new non-profit fuel. And if India wants to solve for both growth and justice, the non-profit sector must move from the margins to the mainstream. That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by Vinay Joshi and Rajas Nayak, sound designed by Amrit Reddy. A new episode of TMB drops every Tuesday, Thursday and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, don't forget to listen to Corner Office Conversations, a brand new show from the Economic Times where ET's brightest minds talk to the most interesting business leaders from India and the world. Every alternate Monday on your favorite listening platform. Thank you and have a good week ahead.